Good afternoon, everyone. You are listening to the new WCEG Network on WCEG TalkRadio.com. Click your live screen tab or watch us live on your smart TV, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, WCEG Network. I am Herman Anderson. My co-host is Anthony Aiken. Our show is Veteran Today, and we will be speaking live in the community for the next hour. We are the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group, and there are ways, addition to what I told you above, how to join our conversation. You can subscribe free to your YouTube channel, WCEG Network. Like us, follow us, and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And we have added some platforms and new opportunities. They are iOS, Apple, and iPhone, iPads. Go to the Apple Store, search for WCEG Talk Radio, and download it. Apple TV, search for WCEG Network. Apple Watch, search for WCEG Network. And Android users, mobile phones and tabs, go to Google Play and search for WCEG Talk Radio. And last but not least, the topics and opinion of those of the show hosts and guests, not WCEG Network. We are a nonprofit. Thank you for your support and your donations. Brother Anthony Aiken, how are you today?
I am blessed, brother. How are you? And great to see you again. And I want to say thank you for 7 years of us being together on this show, speaking truth into the community to our Veterans Today Talk radio show. So I just want to say great seeing you. I know we have an outstanding guest today that you're bringing to our listeners, and we're all excited to be able to hear his comments and to see and view some of his outstanding work. So again, I'm going to take a big punt back to you, and let's get this started and talk with our guests.
We're going to do that as soon as I give you just a brief introduction. Our guest today is Johnny Crawford. He's the Vietnam Black Veteran Poetry Project founder and director based in Mapleton, Georgia. He had documented the human spirits in 45 states, 4 continents, in 44 years. He specializes in large Black and white portraits. He taught photography at Grady High School, Marietta City Schools, Adult Education Program, Clark Atlanta University, University of Georgia, Mercer University. In 2017, he was an artist in residence at Middle Georgia State University, Tubman Museum, Macon, Georgia. While at the Tubman Museum, he produced the museum's first permanent series of Black and white patriots, leading the way to Macon Trailblazer activities. His current project is The Perfect Gift, the African American Transplant Patriotic Project, and the Vietnam Black Soldiers Project. He was an award-winning staff photographer in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for 28 years. During his tenure at the AJC, he photographed the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing, China, the 2004 G8 Summit, Worldwide Leaders, the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, the 1994 Winter Olympics game in Landhammer, Norway, and 5 U.S. presidents. Johnny has a master's in photojournalism from the University of Ohio, a degree in psychology, public relations from Morehouse. He's a Cascade United Methodist member and Word of Faith Family Worship Center. He is from Jackson, Georgia. He's been married to Jacqueline Crawford for 36 years. They have 3 adult sons. Mr. Johnny Crawford.
How you doing, Mr. Herman Anderson and Mr. Aiken? I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your show. One of the things I always tell people you know, people always talk about water patriotism. You know, when I was an intern in 1984, I worked at the VA Medical Center. And that's the first time I really saw patriotism close up. In that waiting room were men from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and probably other places that probably the CIA was doing stuff that I didn't know anything about, but they were all in there trying to get themselves seen. On one side, I never forget, there was a soldier sitting, holding his wife's hand. And I noticed that because he didn't have another hand. There were men sitting over there with no legs. There were men sitting, half their face gone. And then at the corner, when I looked over there was a man sitting in a seat, but the seat next to him was vacant. And I remember a guy goes over to sit in the seat, and the guy said, "Can't you see him?" You know, that was a Vietnam veteran. You know, I would learn later on that that guy was on a trail in Vietnam, and out of nowhere, I guess a rocket or whatever hit his partner and killed him. And, you know, blood and all the stuff all over him. And the guy couldn't shake it. So, you know, he always saw the guy beside him. And I thought that was kind of unusual until, you know, by the time I finished my work as an intern at the VA Medical Center, I found that a lot of veterans, you know, who lost friends could not let them go. And they saw them all the time. And so fast forward about 40 years, I'm in my church at Cascade United Methodist Church, and we had a veterans breakfast. And one of the gentlemen, his name is Johnny Miller. And I've been knowing him for a long time. I mean, he's always smiling. I never saw the man, he's one of the few men in my life, I never saw him angry. And so I'm thinking he's getting ready to get up there on the stage and talk about something funny. And Johnny started talking about his time in Vietnam. And see, I've been knowing him probably about 10 years. I had no idea he served in Vietnam. And so Johnny tells this story about he's on this trail and going up this mountain. I think it was hills. I can't remember the hill right now, but he said they were looking for what they were looking for is basically some Viet Cong, but they ran into a North Vietnam regiment, and he said these guys were loaded for bear, and he said they cut their unit up so bad, and Johnny took a hit in the chest, and then to make matters worse, he said we got overrun, and he said when you things couldn't get any worse, he said we got bombed by our own people. And he said that if 45 men died instantly from their own bomb. And he said wow. he and a couple of men laid waiting for help, and he said it was too hot for them to come in. And I didn't understand what too hot was until he explained to me. He said it was just too hot for them to come in. And so he said it came in, you know, like a day later, and they basically thought Johnny was dead. But he was one of the few men that lived through that. And you would think, you know, he said it took him 18 months to get himself where he could walk and talk, walk and get back together. And he came back to the United States, you know, getting ready to take his job back at General Motors, and he couldn't get his job back. And so he ended up being one of the few people, one of the first people filed a civil rights suit against General Motors to get his job back. He never got it. He got a settlement. And so when I heard that story, I was like, man, I was looking for a project to work on. I said, that's pretty interesting. And they said, well, you think Johnny's story, you need to hear Byron's story. You need to hear Fred's story, you know, and all these men I had been in church with for years and never knew what they'd gone through. And that's why I started the project.
Okay, that is super. And I know I'm a Vietnam veteran. Anthony is a Vietnam veteran. And one of the things that I found about that everybody that I speak with dealing with Vietnam veterans, and that is that a lot of in our we had I had a conversation with someone, and they said there are a lot of people in their family that are Vietnam veterans, Vietnam era veterans. They didn't even know they were military or went to Vietnam, because when we came back, we didn't talk about it. We didn't tell them about
Yeah,
it. And
yeah, yeah.
so
You know, just listening to both of you, I'm just tripping about all of the veterans we've met over the years that are in what I call a silent nightmare. They look normal, everything is normal that you think is normal, but they're not normal, and they're going through it. I mean, even this morning, I saw a picture flashed on my screen from 27 years ago. It just came up on Facebook. I didn't solicit it or anything, but it was something during my military career that immediately put me back into that position that I could feel it, smell it, touch it. So just imagine those guys that Mr. Crawford saw, each one with their own personal tragedies of a lost limb or some type of scenario that they were living with it every day. And then Herman, you just talked about something that's even more prolific. It's something we deal with all the time. So that's why it's great for us on our medium, our show, to tell folks that there are opportunities to get help.
definitely. And I
Opportunities to
mean,
get
Johnny, because I've listened to Johnny and we've talked, I mean, each story that he has of people he's photographed is, I mean, it's super, it's touching. Because just listening to him tell us about his action when he does photograph a soldier. And like with me, once he got started and got me talking, and he was just, I don't know how many pictures he took, but he's a super photographer, and he know how to get the best out of
oh
everybody that he
yeah,
deals with.
yeah, it's amazing to hear these stories. And as we said to Mr. Crawford just prior to the show, each one of those images carry a story. And when you take a look at those men and women that served, it's amazing their trials. So, we both salute him, and we're very glad that he's back here on our show to give us an update of what he's done since we had him on the show previously with other veterans. Mr. Crawford.
Right.
One of the keys to photographing anybody, I always tell people, when you meet somebody, you don't show them who you are. You show them your agent. Okay, you show them who you want to be. But when you're taking a portrait, you have to photograph the person. And the only way you're going to get that person is to ask the right question. Because if you ask the right question, just like a lawyer, if you ask that right question, that person is going to come out and you're going to talk to him. And it's very different. It's very different.
Yeah, very different. Very different. So have you run to any veteran giving their particular story, becoming very emotional and about that experience, and seem as though you're just bringing it back to the forefront for them?
It's a good question. One of the things that I was very careful about, because I have a degree in psychology, and I understood that when you're photographing people who've been through trauma, because I saw my father die when I was 6 years old. My mother died when I was 3. And, my first grade teacher, my first best friend, first white friend, and all this stuff happened before I got to the 5th grade. Okay, so I understand trauma. So it's very, very, you have to be you have to ask the right question, but at the same time, you have to be sensitive to the individual. I think the most emotional man I photographed, and he's the only person in my whole exhibit that his eyes are closed. And because when I start talking to him, let me back a little bit. Most of the men that I photographed, only 1 out of 3 of every man that I asked agreed to be photographed. First of all, everybody I asked did not agree. One guy said, I love your project, but I can't open that door. He said, I threw away the key a long time ago. But one gentleman, he's a minister now, and he had been in therapy for 50 years. Think about that. He had been in therapy for 50 years. And so when I asked him, where did he serve? Just a simple question. He closed his eyes and started praying. And he's the only one in my entire exhibit that his eyes are closed. And during when the exhibit opened in Macon, his wife came to me and says, why is my husband the only one his eyes are closed? I said, because when I start asking him, he immediately started praying. It was just that powerful. And so with him, I didn't ask him any more questions. One of the things you want to do is, it's almost like a doctor, you don't want to do no harm. But at the same time, it's like I was telling many of the men, if you don't tell your story and people don't hear your story or don't see your portrait, 100 years from now, they can say you never existed.
Yeah. But the key factor is to use the right key to open the door for them to communicate. If they don't have that good feeling about their story being told, that door will never open. A true door.
That and another thing that Johnny said is how reluctant we are to even tell our story or even go there when you only get 1 out of 3 person to even agree to be interviewed. And like I was saying, most Vietnam veterans we just walk around, nobody know we are Vietnam veterans.
Correct. Right. They don't have a clue.
One of the things is that, and I have to explain this to some young people. I have this month I have 3 exhibits on the Vietnam veterans, one in my hometown in Jackson, Georgia, one at the Epicenter in Atlanta, and another one's at a school. And one of the things you have to explain to, especially young children, you have to explain to them that, like one little boy said, well, what did those soldiers do? And so when you're talking to an elementary school kid, I said, well, they went to a war. And he said, what was the name of the war? I said, it was the Vietnam War. And he says, well, they look very, very distinguished. I said, they are. But he said, what made them special? I said, when they went, most of these men, they could not vote.
No.
Ride on the back of a bus. They'd ride on the back of a bus. They couldn't go in a restaurant. They couldn't go to McDonald's. I said, but they still served. And the little boy looked at me perplexed. He couldn't understand why they couldn't do all that stuff. And I had to explain to him, it's not like now when you basically have freedom. I said, when they went, a lot of these men went, not necessarily because they didn't want to go, because a couple of men told me, said they were before a judge. A judge said, either you go or you go to jail.
Yeah, I know quite a few.
So one of the things is that, one of the biggest thing about the project is twofold in many ways. One is to show the appreciation for those men who, and one guy I photographed, he said, in all my life, nobody ever said thank you. And he said, when you did the porch and you called me up, he said, I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't want to do it. He said, but the fact that you called me and said, and I said, I thank you whether you participate either way, and he did. And the other one is to introduce people to, their uncle. They say that the uncle that nobody talks to because he's jumpy and shell shot, and he drinks. It explains why. It's an explanation. It's like I told a person one day, I said, look, there's a reason why everybody does everything. There's a reason, okay? And until you understand that reason, you're gonna assume things about that person. And I say, what I try to do is try to give you a visual picture of what these men went through their faces and through their, and if you get a chance to talk, I got contacted a couple of weeks ago by a group that's doing a new film on Black Vietnam veterans. And they wanted me to introduce some of the veterans for them to talk. And I told them, I said, well, I'll contact them first. And then if they say yes, then I'll give you. Mr. Anderson, I said, because one of the things I can't portray I can't, I want to say this. I don't want to lose these men's trust.
Yeah.
Because they trust me, and I'm not going to give your information to somebody who may have an ulterior motive.
Correct.
So that's one of the things that has been very difficult is trying to photograph veterans in other states. Most of the time I end up sending a copy of a book that I've done so that they can see it. And even then, people are suspicious because during that time when a lot of these men like you guys served, everything was under suspicion. You couldn't trust anybody. You definitely couldn't trust the government. You couldn't trust the media in some situations. And so, what happens to you when you're young, you don't forget it when you get older.
Yeah, there are a couple of Vietnam veterans that I'd like to recommend that you speak with and do an interview with, because they have some very significant stories in regards to their career. And like I said to you before, when you take a look at the images, each face tells a story. There's a story behind each one. So before they get too much older, I definitely would like to introduce you to them. They're locally here in Atlanta, that you'll be able to get in contact with them and listen to their unique story of being a Black Vietnam soldier.
Tell us, you mentioned your exhibits in your bio. I read that your organization is headquartered here in Mableton. So what exhibits do you have out now? Where are they?
Well, one of them is that you can see. It's a smaller exhibit. It's more than about 9 portraits. It's at the Riverside Epicenter in Austell. It's right across from Word of Faith Family Cathedral. It's in the gym. Another one, the outdoor banners are in my hometown of Jackson, Georgia. And then I got one at a local school. Exhibits, one of the things for me is I've always enjoyed listening to older people. Let me just put it that way. Because my grandparents raised me. And my grandfather used to always say, he says, you got to live some to get some wisdom. So a shortcut is to listen to somebody who's lived and learn from them. And so I've always enjoyed, listening to seniors, although now I am one of them. But a young senior, Mr. Anderson. I see you smile. But I turned 60, but my body tells me that I'm older. I used to jump up out of a chair. Now I have to rock. So my body tells me I'm older. But but getting back seriously, you want to leave this earth with, God gives us all talents, and my talent was simply I had an eye, and I like to listen. And that's the key to being a good photographer. You have to listen. Listening is a skill that in many cases, surpasses what you visually see. And if you don't believe it, you watch somebody who's blind, how they navigate and how they do certain things. So I'm a very good listener, but I also I'm a lover of history. And I think that it's important that when we talk about patriots, they don't look like the Marlboro Man.
No.
The patriots, and throughout history, you go to Christmas Addicts and the first guy to drop during the American Revolution, and you go through all these things and you see it. These people, the patriots, are people who may not look like what everybody think a patriot looks like. Because one of the funniest stories, it's not funny, funny, but it's funny. This black Vietnam veteran was telling me that this guy, I think it was in 1965, if I can remember. And he said that this boy came, I won't say what he's called him, but this boy came from Alabama, and he's gonna get in there and he's gonna, he's calling people N-words and so forth and so on. He's tough, and he's gonna go and he's gonna kill him some Viet Congs. He gonna do all that stuff. This man said they were out down in the bush and they came into a real firefight. So this boy was screaming like a girl.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You never know. But I've always been one of the advocates that I never take anyone for granted. Never, ever take anyone for granted. And number two is never the appearance that's key to me. It's the fight in the dog.
Yeah.
It's the fight in the dog. So you could be a meek-looking guy, a meek-looking woman, and that fight, that inner spirit is just as strong as it could be. I mean, you've touched on a few things there, Mr. Crawford, about how you can really check and test the limit of someone. Like this person you just talked about, crying like a baby. I've been around individuals, and I'm sure you and Herman have, that boast to be such and such. But when the crunch gets close, or the fire gets hot, then you really find out about the spirit and the tenacity of that person. You always know someone based on the sensitivity of the matter. That's why I enjoy the game of golf. Even me being legally blind, and you were just talking about listening skills. I understand my legal blindness caused me to be more patient. And as a result of my patience, my concentration level, to make sure that whatever I'm encountering, I'm really encountering it. I don't take it for granted. And a lot of individuals who are at various stages of disability understand, once they find that key for them to understand their disability, then it opens up an entirely new avenue of life. It really does. So again, it's not the appearance like you talked about, but it's the fight in the dog that makes someone move forward, even in the midst of adversity. You can still move.
When we talked before, I know you told me your goal when you first started the project is to interview Vietnam veterans in certain states. So what states have you gotten to, and how many have you interviewed, and are you close to your goal?
Okay. One of the things I'm basically taking their portraits. I listen to their stories so that I know how to photograph. When I first started, I wanted to photograph them and do an interview. But I learned from when I worked at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for you can't do both. You can't do both. You have to. And so I made a decision that I tape some of them, but I concentrate to take their portraits. Right now, I've finished Georgia. And when I say finished Georgia, not necessarily finished shooting portraits in Georgia, but I finished shooting the portraits for the exhibit. One of the unique things about when you're doing a project, you have to be able to cut it off at a certain point. So if you don't, you'll never move. So,
right.
And so I've finished, because I have people call me from Georgia all the time after they see the exhibits up. And even a couple of those guys that turned me down. They said, I'm ready now, but I can't go back. I'll eventually come back and shoot state, but right now I finished Florida. when I say I finished Florida, I photographed veterans in Jacksonville, and I photographed veterans in Hollywood, Florida. I thought I would be in Alabama by now, but there's a problem with my contact. However, God always, they say, has a ram in the bush or whatever. So I have a lady contacted me in North Carolina. So I'll be going to North Carolina to photograph veterans. You know, the goal is to photograph veterans in Georgia, Alabama, you know, all the southern states, in the northern states, Ohio, New York, New Jersey, and then California. And I tried to pick states where they had the largest number of Black Vietnam veterans drafted. And there's a misnomer that every Black person went to Vietnam was drafted. No,
Yeah.
the guys that I photographed, 20% volunteered.
Yeah.
One of the guys told me in Florida, he said, I'm just gonna be honest with you. He said, there was no jobs. He said, and I had no prospects. He said, I could get killed in Florida, or I can get killed with a check in Vietnam. And so he went to Vietnam. And he talked about the fact that he was blessed that he came back. But he said he didn't realize that what he saw changed him for life.
Life. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, I volunteered. I was in South Georgia, and I finished high school, and I didn't have the funds to go to school, and I didn't want to keep working out on the farm, so I volunteered for the Air Force. So that's part of my story, and like I say, unless in certain situations, I never give everybody all the details unless they keep asking questions.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting. And I always tell, my granddaddy used to tell me, I got in photography, most people don't realize. I never really wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to, when I was a kid, my grandparents raised me. There were two things I wanted to do in my life. One, I wanted to go on this thing they call a vacation. I had heard about them, but we always worked in the fields, and I had to take care of hogs. So my two goals in life was to go on a vacation and never had to kill another hog. And people think that's, when I tell people that story, and I've done a lot in my life, but as a child, your dreams are based upon what you see. That's the root of your dream. And so fortunate enough, I had people around me that thought I was pretty smart. And I was also very curious. And so between all that stuff, I ended up, my grandfather, he always wanted to know knowledge, and reason why I sat beside him as a child. And so when his picture appeared in the newspaper, it was so black, only thing you saw was two white eyes and a row of teeth. And that messed me up. And so I went to the newspaper office and said, why my grandfather looked like this and a white man on the page looked different? And it wasn't that, I was being mean, but I just wanted to know the answer. And that's how I actually became a photographer, out of not because I wanted to take pictures, because I wanted to figure out what the problem was. I wanted to solve that problem. And so that led to Morehouse, and then that led to the VA, and then it led to the Journal-Constitution, and that led to this. I tell young people all the time, sometimes, God gives all of us a gift. Everybody has a gift. How you get to that gift, it's different ways. But the bottom line, eventually, you're not going to be happy until you use that gift. And so for me, once I got laid off from the newspaper after 28 years, I had to fall back and think about, what I'm going to do. I had all this training in photography. And then one day, like I said, when I photographed, I was doing projects, and then I started shooting pictures. I was doing a lot of stuff in color, and then it kind of came back to black and white. It came back to what got me started in the first place. A bad
Yeah.
black and white picture of my grandfather.
Yeah.
So,
That's an interesting story about imagery and the projection of a person. And you, especially what you just talked about in the newspaper scenario. And that's why I stated that I really enjoy the imagery that you have of each person, because each person's image obviously indicates there's a story behind it. And I can go back to World War II with my uncle who served in the Navy, and on that treacherous day of December 7th, 1941, he was at Pearl Harbor. And the number of years that he spent in the VA hospital in Long Beach, California, reliving that scenario. At that time, they used to call it shell shock, but it was, PTSD and everything associated with it. So, like Herman, and we stood on the shoulders of many that served before. And you can go all the way back to Crispus Attucks, in the early 1700s. Again, it's not the imagery, but it's the fight in the dog. How this man, and Dorian Miller, I can just go through names and names of people. Dorian Miller is a mess cook with the Navy. And he goes out and on a naval ship and mans a machine gun that saved many lives. Again, not the imagery, but the fight in the dog. So I salute what you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing. I think it needs to be publicized even more, what you've done, because this is a very significant piece of illustration that you have and the stories that are behind them.
Anthony always leads me to my next question. I was going to ask you anyway, but how you finance this, and how can people, if they want to make a donation or whatever, how are you financing this, and are you looking for donations?
Well, I financed it myself. One of the things that I had been going back and forth about being a nonprofit, and I still struggling with this. But you can go to Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project, and it's a website. It's Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project, and you can see, you can buy a book, you can buy a poster, and more importantly, you can contact me. And if you're in one of those states, if you have an uncle or you have a person that served in Vietnam, is to get me, the contacts of those people in those states so I can photograph them. I'm not doing it for money, which is, and I think is a reason that I'm passionate about it. It takes funds. I'm not gonna lie, to put on the exhibits, but to shoot the portraits, this is not like when I first started photography. You had to buy film and all that stuff. I got a digital camera, and so very good digital camera. So once that person signs up, it's just me and them. And every veteran that I photograph gets a copy of their portrait. And veterans have used those portraits for their books, and unfortunately, a couple of them for their funeral programs, because it made them look the way they should be looking. And so just go to Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project.com, and on the website, what you'll see is not only the portraits, but I have videos of Dr. King's speeches against Vietnam. I have some Vietnam veterans telling their own stories. I got a section called books, and there are books that are written by Black Vietnam veterans. And you can also see the exhibits. One thing I hope this project does about before the time is over. So if you want to know anything about a Black Vietnam veterans or a Black soldier served in Vietnam, you could go to this site and you can get information. My grandfather said, from the horse's mouth. You'll get their story either through book form or video form. And that's the most powerful. And one of the things that I tell most people they don't really understand is that the youngest person who died in Vietnam was a 15-year-old boy that went through Marine boot camp at 14. If that's, go to that site, go to the Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project and watch that video of that kid, the story of him. And I'm going to tell you tell you a little story about it. The guy who ended up making memorial thing that sits on his grave was a famous artist that served with the kid. Now he wasn't famous when he did it, but once they figured out who he was, and over the years, you know, he did his memorial, the thing that sits on his grave. I forget what it was, his headstone. And to make even more amazing, the guy who takes care of his grave is a white soldier. And so there are all kinds of stories and videos on the site. Some that is just simply mind blowing. You know, you got stories of intense racism, but then you got a story of a white soldier who goes out and gets killed carrying a black veteran, you know, to safety. And this boy grew up this man grew up in Alabama, he grew up in the segregated South. You know, so there's all kinds of neat, what I call real human stories. And one thing I want to say, Mr. Aiken, you touched on this. You know, you don't know. I always tell people, you know, people say, well, you know, I'm a Christian. I said, but you never know if you're a Christian until you've been tested.
Tested, correct.
You know, until you get tested, you don't know what, you know, you get your driver's license and you say, I'm a driver, but you're not really a driver until you get your driver's license. You have to pass a test, you know, get a degree. You got to pass some tests. And so one of the things about these veterans is these are all patriots that passed the test. You know, they're one of the most amazing things that I learned is years ago in 1994 when I had to photograph the oldest living World War I veteran. He was a white gentleman. He was 91 years old. And I asked him a question. I said, sir, what was it like to serve in World War I? And he looked at me and he said, are you a veteran? I said, no, sir. He said, son, I pray to God you never know.
Never knew.
That's true. Give us your website again, because that's, to me, that's a golden nugget.
It's Vietnam Black Soldiers with the S, portraitproject.com.
Exactly right. Got it.
And you know, like I said, even if you don't, you know, just go and see it and hear these men's voice. And one thing I would say, listeners, one thing that most people don't realize, there were over 1,000 Black women who volunteered to go to Vietnam, okay, as nurses. And one of the things I've been looking for is trying to find those nurses. And some of the stuff that those nurses went through, there's a video of this nurse who's trying to take care of this soldier, and the soldier happened to be white, and he told her he didn't want no to touch him. You know, he didn't want no N-word to touch him. But that pain hit him, you know, and dollars, you know, and nobody else was coming, you know. So it's amazing. Some of the stories are amazing to show how far people will take racism, but at the same time, it's a story that shows, you know, how being in a dogfight and your life's on the line, how all of a sudden you realized that you're as equal as anybody else, and you're not superior, and how people change. And that's one of the most amazing things about looking at those videos, is that you get a chance to see human nature, you know, raw and uncut. And I think that, and one of the things I like to tell your listeners, you know, if you have a person in your family that served in Vietnam, sometimes just sit down and just listen. Don't try to talk. Just listen to their story. Because sometimes just listen, them having a chance to tell their story to somebody who's interested in it might make a huge difference, because we all need to be listened to.
Well, I'm the type person is, if I really don't want to debate you, but if you want to listen to me, and then I'll talk to you. But I think there are a lot of veterans that are in the situation. Someone would start a conversation with them, but they want to dominate the conversation, so it just shut the veteran down.
Exactly. You know, one of the things I had to learn is that when you're talking, and really my grandfather taught me this when I was a child. He used to say to me, the most important skill you'll ever learn in your life is to listen. He said that will eventually save your life. But he said, more importantly, he said, nobody knows if you're a genius or an idiot until you open your mouth. So he said, if you listen and shake your head like you understand, he said, you'll learn something. And I tell you, Mr. Anderson, Ms. Aiken, that got me through graduate school, undergraduate school, got me through jobs, got me through sitting in meetings with CEO. I had no idea what they were talking about. When I left there, they still have a strong opinion of me. You know, you just listen. And nothing, it doesn't cost anything to listen, but it could cost you everything if you open your mouth.
That was one of the first pieces of advice that I received from my first sergeant, a Vietnam veteran. I was an XO of a unit. And he came to my office and said, sir, I just have one thing to say to you. Please listen to your soldiers. Listen. If you listen to us, you'll be a success. If you don't listen, it's open. So I agree with you, listening, understanding, let people voice their opinions, their concerns, and then you make your own decisions from there. But I mean, you've opened up so many doors in my mind about the project that you're doing. And I'm so very, very happy that you're here now, because you just don't know, Mr. Crawford, but you're now listening to the #1 ranked station in the community. You understand? In the 6 years we've been in business, we have just done a phenomenal job under the leadership and vision of Ms. Penny Rogers, from a mustard seed to this point. So having individuals like you to return to this show, to expound on what you've done for something that is still raw in many people's minds, Vietnam, I salute you. Big time, what you do.
Well, thank you. And to echo what Anthony said, we just got our update on our rating for this year, for last year, for this year. And we are #1 in several categories in our the genre that we operate in. And we gonna be expanding and going to TV also. So we are moving on up, as they said.
Yeah, moving on up. And it's a, dedicated work of Ms. Rogers, Ms. Greer, who runs our production and keep us in line, and the WCEG Network family of people that are dedicated to provide good, informative information to not only our community, but to the world. And this is something that we enjoy. We don't get paid for this. This is something that we enjoy, something we enjoy doing to bring, as I say, truth into the community. Good, bad, or indifferent. But it's going to be accurate. It's going to be timely. And it's hopefully something that our listeners will pick up on and react to.
Well, we're in this. We all three of us are in the same category as you mentioned. We are doing this because it's our passion, and we are not being paid to do that.
If you don't mind, one thing I always want to tell people, and I have to say this. I had to talk to a person one time. He said, "Well, so what about this is the debate about Black history?" And I said, "Well, first of all, history has no color.
Right.
History is simple. History is simple. A moment in time, most of the time, told through the eyes of the person who has the most to gain. or has the most power. You know, if I ask you anybody the history of their family, they ain't gonna start off with the drunk in the family. They're gonna start off with the person who's most successful because they want their family history to look strong. And so I always tell people, you know, when you hear people start talking about history, you know, every day there's 24 hours in a day, you know, there's 60 minutes an hour, and there's history being made every second. But as human beings, we pluck out certain amount of times within a day and make that more important than any other day. But the reality is everything that happened that day is equal as important. We pick out evidence. So I always tell people, you know, when you're talking about Black history, you're not really talking about history as far as America, you're talking about American history. You're just pulling a certain point out and you make an emphasis. But the reality is all history is important. And so for me, Vietnam Black soldiers are part of the Vietnam experience, but you know, it's just a pluck out of history like anything else. But it's important that we give a overall view of all history and the good, the bad, and the ugly, and therefore we don't have problems in the future. We have problems when you start picking out little points of history and emphasize that over the another point. So that's the only point I wanted to make.
It's a good point.
And
Very good
I
point.
knew when you asked me, we could use up all the time, and plus, so we have used up all our time. And thank you, and we'll have you back again. And
Absolutely.
go ahead.
Absolutely, we got to have them back. You know,
And
definitely.
to all our listeners, this is Veteran Today. We are WCEG, the new WCEG Network, and we rating #1 in our agenda, and we will be getting going to TV later, adding that to it. We have added apps that you can use to listen to us that I gave you earlier, and go to our website, which is WCEG Networks, and get additional information.
Fantastic. Good news information.